Hi, my name's Lauren Epstein. Welcome to You're Hired here on 96.7 FM, Arlington, Virginia. Today, we're going to talk about what you as an employee should do in your first 90 days. Those first 90 days are so critical. I think we all know that when we start something new, the best way to have a good long-term result is to have a good start. Like any relationship, the beginnings can foretell the future. So I've got some amazing guests today with me. But first, I want to thank my team. You're listening to this radio show, because of Afote Odai, who is our production engineer. Afote is very, very diligent about making sure that we are recorded correctly. And our production assistant, Alex Pascasello, who also is a big part of the show. So with me today, I've got Dr. Joelle Davis Carter. And Joelle is currently the Dean for Student Development at Piedmont Community College, which is located in North Carolina. And Dr. Carter is also the founder and CEO of RJC Consulting, which is focused on providing training and coaching for higher education institutions, corporations, and nonprofit organizations. She is highly focused on employee performance and strength development, and in making sure that collaboration in the workplace environment is super strong.
Yes.
Welcome to the show, Joelle.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Lauren.
I told Joelle she is the first doctor we've had on the show, which is awesome.
I'm just glowing.
I also have with me in the studio Ric Fleisher, and I've known Ric for quite a few years. Ric has got more than 30 years of experience in business development and technology. Ric has been the founder of many startups with some amazing results. And he's also led employees to success, which is why he's here, because he's going to share with us his experience of what you should do in the first 90 days. And he is currently with Upside Door, which is changing the way people buy and sell real estate. Welcome, Ric.
Thank you so much.
So tell us, what's Upside Door before we go further?
Sure. It's a new platform to help people save money when they sell or buy a home. Typically, real estate agents, at least on the sell side, get 3% in a traditional mode. And our belief is that that's too high, and that in most transactions, people don't derive a benefit of that 3%, and that we can help people be successful in this selling their home at 1%.
So people would go to upsidedoor.com. We'll have you guys share the ways they can connect with you later, but I just wanted folks to get some context of that. And then also on the phone, we have Hilary Potts, and Hilary is a leadership strategist and executive coach. She specializes in organizational change and executive transitions. And why she's on the show is because she authored a book called The Executive Transition Playbook, First 90 Days. She's an expert in executive onboarding with other books, and also she helps leaders navigate today's competitive business world with success. And I'm excited to welcome Hilary. Thank you so much for being on the show with us. Thanks for having me. So let's talk about the first 90 days. I know our listeners are thinking about, well, what does that mean, the first 90 days? So, you get a job, which is really exciting for most people, and you come to work. And I know in the first day, you do orientation, what's called orientation. And orientation is the first day or 2 or 3 or 4 where you kind of get the lay of the land. You fill out your paperwork, your payroll information. You may be getting some training on what to do or how the organization works. And then you have your onboarding. And in HR, onboarding is considered the next 3 to 6 months. Onboarding is not just getting you into the company, but it's making sure that you have a long career and that you know what you're going to be measured by, that you know what criteria you're going to have to be successful. So in understanding what you can do to make the first 90 days the most successful, I think will help you and your employer. So also, if employers, you're listening, you should be tuning into this, because we're going to give you some tips on how to make sure that your people are successful going forward. So I'd like to start the conversation off with Joelle. And Joelle, actually, we talked on the phone, and I said Joelle because she wanted to be on the radio show. I put out that anyone have any ideas? And Joelle's like, yes, I got an idea. And I remember we were talking, she's like, the first 90 days. And I'm like, yes, that's a great idea. So, Joelle, tell me why the first 90 days are important to you and why they're important to us.
Right. You know, what I've seen from the higher education aspect of the workplace environment is that the first 90 days are very critical. And it's critical because of a key process that you just mentioned, the onboarding. I think Rick and Hilary will agree. Some organizations do onboarding. I mean, wonderful. It's organized, it's structured, it's complex. And in other organizations, they don't even use the word onboarding. It's like, here's the keys, here's the manual, get to work. And depending on the job, that can have serious implications. So I believe in the first 90 days, the way in which you introduce, immerse, and acclimate yourself is very critical. With that job description that you applied for, the job that description you read when you applied, are some of the tasks and duties listed what you need to jump into now? Or is there other stuff? What's the low-hanging fruit? What is the directive from the manager about what needs to get accomplished first? And again, depending on your experience, your expertise, and professionalism, it can be intimidating or hard to get that directive. So kind of grabbing that whole process in the first 90 days is very critical, and it's strategy. So that's why I think it's very crucial.
Yeah, and I know my experience of starting jobs is that you don't really know what's expected from you.
Right.
Because job descriptions generally don't say, hey, this is what's expected of you. It's kind of like what you'll do, but everyone wants to please their boss or please the people around them. And how do you do that?
Right.
And that's a part of this, right?
Right.
So we're going to talk about that strategy.
Yes.
I know in a lot of organizations, particularly with salespeople, we'll ask them, what is your 30, 60, 90? Which is asking them, what will you do in your first 30, 60, 90 days? Now, we don't do that for other fields, particularly in sales, but I've never seen it in other. But I think that's kind of part of what we're talking here. And Hilary, what's your take? What's the value of even talking about the first 90 days?
So the first 90 days, as Joelle was saying, it gets you immersed in the organization. And you're able to gain the knowledge about the company, your position, how you work with others. You get a chance to make meaningful connections with the people you're going to be working with, whether they're inside the company or outside. And then you get a chance to figure out how you're going to lead yourself. And so leaving that up to chance or leaving it up to somebody else means that you may be missing some key pieces. So it's really it's helpful to start with a real clear plan, whether the company has an onboarding plan or you bring your own. I always feel it's really important to start with that plan.
Rick, what's your sense of you've hired a lot of people. What's the difference between, have you ever had an employee start and no 90-day plan?
Most people in a startup, when we're interviewing them, we need to understand the value we're going to get to make us feel comfortable about transitioning them into being an employee. If we don't feel that there's value out of the gate, enterprise value, that they're going to do something on the product side or bring us sales or help us figure out a marketing strategy, it's very hard to hire somebody because there's a lot of risk. But you've gotten
past that. We're talking about, hey, I do think you can add value.
And then you're on the inside.
Right.
And then you really need to demonstrate that you're going to own something. A lot of times, whether you're in a big or a small company, you're in a meeting of your peers and something needs to be done. And if the meeting ends and you didn't take ownership of anything, that's a problem.
Totally agree.
You should be introspective and say, we just had a meeting and we talked about 3 different initiatives and I came out with my hands clean. That's a problem. You should jump right in. You should take ownership of something.
So what you're talking about, Rick, is here's a tactic for your first 30, 60, 90. Do you ever give your people or an actual written 30, 60, 90 or 90-day plan of including things like we're going to talk about, but I'm guessing here's what you got to accomplish in the first 2 weeks, the first 4 weeks, the first 6 weeks. Do you do that? Or is it kind of implied that the people you're hiring should already know? And you're just kind of counting on it, right?
Yeah. In the early side, when you're in a startup like current company Upside Door, we're not hiring anybody that wouldn't deliver the goods. And when we articulate to them what we have to accomplish, we clearly state what we want them to be able to deliver. Like, we'd like to see you contribute in these ways, or your past experience tells me that you could handle this. And so when they come in, they can put their head down and start executing on that.
So you're setting up some expectations, but there's no formal plan.
No.
And so if there's no formal plan, then the measuring back to that plan is kind of informal and somewhat subjective. Somewhat subjective.
Yeah, it could be, and that's could be problematic.
Could be problematic.
But there's so much in flux at an early stage that some of what you do, it's kind of like a business plan. It's very important that you have a plan and articulate some of the things you want to do. But the truth is, if you execute it to the letter of the plan, you might be one of the first people that wrote a business plan that everything worked to the letter. Right. So you need to be a little more nimble and flexible.
So there is flexibility in this. So I want to go back to Joelle.
Right.
Let's break down the first 90 days.
Right.
How would you break it down as far as like a story arc? What's the first part of this 90-day plan that people should be aware of?
Right. Even thinking about my new role as dean at Piedmont Community College, and I'm approaching day 45. So, in the first 30...
So you're halfway in your 90 days.
I'm halfway in my 90 days.
Do you have a 90-day plan?
I personally do. I've never been given one by a supervisor. I've been given what the key priorities are for the year. And there's this expectation that I have the skill set and expertise to create a deliverable. So like with my VP now, she goes, welcome, Carter. For this semester, I need butts and seats. We've got to get enrollment up. There's some organizational restructuring that I want you to look at in the unit with the 45 people that fall on your plan. And also, I would like to see career services further developed within your unit. So right there, I said, okay, up until holiday break, these are 3 priority goals, and I need to do something with those.
Now, did you share this with your boss, or is this kind of just you?
No, this is the directive that she gave me.
Right, but when you're saying, hey, these are my goals to accomplish that, was that something that you shared?
Yeah, I did. I said, this is how
documented or just verbal?
Just verbal and one-on-ones. She's very visionary.
Sure.
And
that's common, right?
Common, yeah. Not taking a lot of copious notes. So I'm like, Dr. J, this is how I plan to approach those directives you gave me by January. Okay, so we're talking about organizational change. So Rick and Hilary, what did I do? My first 30 days, I have had one-on-one meetings with absolutely everyone that falls under my portfolio.
But wait, hang on, because I think you're skipping a step. So you kind of created your own 90-day plan.
I did.
And you documented it for you.
Yes.
You said, I know what I need to do, and then you broke it down into A, B, C, D, very tactical.
I did.
Now, did you share that tactical stuff with your boss?
I did not. Not in a written form.
Sure.
But during my biweekly one-on-ones, I say, Joyce, this is where I am.
Right. So the reason we're talking about it is because would that be kind of the penultimate of now she is on your page and now you're both working off the same playbook? Because I think what you're saying is, hey, this is what I'm going to accomplish bit by bit. If I'm going to eat this elephant, here's what I'm going to accomplish. And we're not talking about accomplishing the whole thing, but if you're 80% there or 70% there, and then if you aren't getting through some of these things right away, your boss can see, hey, you've got blockers.
Right. Right. And so, Joelle, I've been listening to you over the last couple of weeks. Maybe you want to approach engaging and getting to know the staff this way rather than that way.
So she's already giving you feedback on your plan.
Correct.
Which is what everyone wants, right? They want to know that they're getting feedback, they're doing the right thing or the wrong thing, that's being correct.
Right. But you'll see with this, and all supervisors are different, I'm kind of managing up politely.
Right.
Because she's giving me these broad goals.
Right.
And I'm like, these are these directives, but they're huge. So I'm going, all right, how do I chip this down so that I can have good progress by the end of the semester? So I basically set the platform, the agenda, and share it with her for her feedback. So kind of managing up a little bit in order to get the feedback I need to move forward.
Well, and that's great. And you're a highly effective executive. So I think that as a listener, you should be thinking about, if I'm not going to get one, how do I create one and manage up? No matter what position you're in, this is something that we're all responsible for. You can do something about this.
Right.
You don't have to let the winds blow and then take your ship. But if you're doing what Joelle is saying, which is you have some general idea of what the directives are, and like a lot of CEOs and a lot of even bosses, they'll be like, here's what I need you to do in very big, broad, make us more money. How much? Just make us more money or bring us more butts and seats, whatever it is, it's usually broad. And you want to identify what the specifics are.
Right.
And then share that with them.
Right.
And then so then you can get the feedback of, here's my plan. Right.
Right.
And so what do you break it down? Is there a difference between the first 30, the second 30, and the next 30?
Yes. I believe, and Hilary and Rick, jump in here and tell me if you have some different ideas. I feel that the first 30 days is the onboarding, the HR orientation, and I call it discovery season. Okay, what is Piedmont Community College? Who is in this organization? Who are the gatekeepers? Who are the 30-plus year folks? This is the only place they've ever worked, plus or the new people coming on with me. What is the pulse of the campus? What is the president's strategic plan? And how might I read into that plan to make sure my work is aligning with that? So those first 30 days kind of very much exploratory. Do staff eat together, or does everyone go their separate ways? Are there certain two people that eat together, and that one person that seems to be the go-to but always eats alone? What's up with that? Right. Getting those cultural norms and those as symbols. Also, it's an opportunity, I think, to get out of my silo. Mm-hmm. What other people on campus are going to impact the work that I do, especially with this enrollment piece that I mentioned with the numbers.
So you're looking at this first piece as, who are all the stakeholders in what I do? Who's going to make me successful in what I do to accomplish the goal that I'm here? Identify them and use those first 30 to build those relationships.
Absolutely.
So it's basic stuff. It's like a lot of, and this is what happens, like you said, somebody starts a job and they just do the work.
Yes.
They're in their office, they're in their desk.
Yeah. First of all, I commend you for being so well behaved and a lady, because what I think you're trying to say, or the way I would interpret what you're saying, is that whenever you're in a new situation, you need to understand the politics.
Yes.
Who wins or loses based on certain things happening? Who's going to get in your way? And what's the culture? And are people comfortable in you achieving your goals? Because sometimes people aren't motivated in a healthy way to see others excel.
Correct.
And they don't have the company or the university or college in mind, or company in mind. They're thinking of themselves.
Yes.
So getting a lay of the land on who all the role players are and who could be a blocker, I think, is an important part of that first time. Because if you're in the meeting and you're saying, hey, I'm going to own that, someone may not want you to own that, or
Correct.
may not want you to be successful going down that path. So I think the initial part of our conversation just talked about the happy path. If everyone was motivated correctly, this is how it would work. But sometimes it doesn't work that way.
So that's awesome, Rick. And Hilary, how would you tell us what are we looking at here? I think Rick is saying that it's up to you as the employee to kind of create your own 30, 60, 90. And we're talking about kind of the politics, the lay of the land, document who is on your team, who may be people that might get in the way, who do you have to win over? What do you think about that?
So I think that's really important, because what I find is one of the mistakes leaders make coming into a role is they want to disregard those social and political aspects that become really crucial. And so knowing the people you're working with, and recognizing that as you're trying to meet them and make connections, I think Rick's really correct. Sometimes those people are kind of questioning who are you and what are you here for, and are we going to be able to work together? So instead of just jumping into those conversations, I always suggest that people prepare for that and to do a little bit of recognizance about who the person is, why do you want to get to know them, what are you going to ask them, and make sure that you're prepared because they'll probably ask you questions. And what do you really want to get out of that first conversation? And most importantly, one conversation leads to the next conversation. What's the next conversation going to be like? And recognize that not everybody is going to be excited that you have come on board.
Right.
And that may be another kind of chart to make. Who's excited about me being here? Who's not excited about me being here? And how do I flip the ones who aren't excited and make sure the ones who are stay?
Right.
At least for the first 90.
I don't want to make it seem like a house of cards or something like that where there's, but sometimes sometimes you're in a situation like that and you have to make the best of it. But the sooner you get a lay of the land, the better off you are.
Yeah, well, I think everyone who's worked, I can say this, I've been in those situations where you don't know who's what and you don't know what to do. And we're going to get to this, but I want to talk about, what you as an employee, you as a manager should be thinking about is like you have an accountability to help this new person get on board. Mm-hmm. And HR folks, and I can say, generally speaking, don't do a good job of this. There is some new technology that's specifically designed for onboarding, but it's not been in our culture. So I'm glad we're talking about this. Right. So what are some of the other things, Hilary, that, you come in and we talked about maybe the first couple of things, which is find out who people are and where they kind of sit in the political landscape and kind of get a sense of what my boss's general guidelines are, and then start breaking down step by step, bit by bit, based on my experience, how I can reach there. And if I don't know, maybe ask people to help. What would be the next thing?
So one of the other things is how you're actually going to show up. And showing up is in a couple ways. One is you're going to need to be introducing yourself over and over again. Mm-hmm. People are going to be asking you both business questions and personal questions. And I find that people are not always prepared for those conversations, or they gloss over them. And so, setting the context of who you are and what you're about and your history without going on, because I also find sometimes people with a lot of experience can go on too long. But being prepared for letting people know who you are, what your expectations are, and then mutually setting those expectations. And I think then the other thing that becomes important is there is a laundry list of things that you're going to need to learn about. And the more you learn about the job, the more you're going to realize you don't know. And to keep a running list of what do you want to learn about and who can help you learn. Because asking the same question to 4 different people, you could get 4 different answers about how things work depending on where they are in the company.
So what are some of the things, Hilary, that people should learn about besides what we talked?
So, if you're coming in from the outside, you really want to understand the company's vision, their values. You want to understand the strategy and where you play a role in that strategy. You want to understand how, and Joelle said it nicely, you want to know how the various people work together. Do you take lunch at your desk? Do you go to the cafeteria? What are the core processes?
I think it's important. I'm interrupting you, but I think it's important when you ask those first questions, people have different ideas of what the strategy is. Mm-hmm. Right? People have ideas about where the company's going.
Right.
So how do you reconcile that?
Are you asking me?
I'm asking somebody.
Yeah. So I think
I'm asking the person who's listening to the show. Call in.
Yeah. So I think strategy. First of all, ask your boss, because typically your boss will probably have a good sense because they're setting direction. And then also ask your peer group, because then their interpretation. And then when there are differences, this is where it's really helpful to circle back with your boss and say, here's what I'm hearing, and I want to know how that plays out in my role.
Yeah, and that's interesting, because I think what generally happens is that people join, they ask their peers what the strategy is, and they've gotten a watered-down version, and then they kind of manage to that, but not to what their manager is saying. Mm-hmm. Right? Well, if everyone kind of thinks this way, then I should think like that because I'm in this group of employees, not what the leadership thinks, which is a whole different thing. And then you have this discontinuity which happens.
Right.
And I also think, as you were talking about a discovery period, you should be, not to sound creepy, but doing the discovery period amongst your peers and your supervisor to understand what motivates them. Are they a runner? Do they have kids? Do they have an elderly parent that's ill? Like, so that you have empathy or understanding about them as you're working through something with them, so you can maybe understand their perspective is shaped by something else.
Right.
So I have a question. So, Joelle, first 30, 60, 90 days, are you going out to lunch with people every day?
No, but kind of once a week for a lunch or a coffee. And
Are you setting them up?
Yes, I'm reaching out. Hi, Joelle Carter, just came on board in September. I'm excited to be here. I understand that in the past we've partnered with this unit on X, Y, and Z. Do you mind if I just come over and say hi? So, and I'm going to their space. If I can, physically walking over to their space so I can see body gestures and just reactions to me and the conversation. So I am being that high touch because of my role.
And what do you think? Should I be going out to lunch with people the first day? Should I be asking them, or coffee, or how should I? I'm looking at you, Rick.
Rick's like, I don't want to go with you to coffee.
I'm a social person in general. So I'd probably be doing it more than once a week, and with more than one person. But it's
so
really
would
more,
you take more than one person out to lunch, or go to would you?
I'm all about networking. So,
So you have 2 or 3 of your colleagues going out to lunch together.
The sooner I can get a pulse of what's going on and how they're thinking as part of that discovery process, the better off I am.
Right.
So depending on the size of the company, if I only did it once a week so I think I'd probably put on some weight with breakfast and and lunches on the front end, and make sure to have a good, clear understanding of what was important to them.
See, I've always done it incorrectly. I've started a job. I don't ask anybody to go to lunch, and then after a couple of weeks, I feel like they've gotten used to me, and then they ask me.
You don't want
so I don't feel like I'm like intruding on the crowd or the clique.
Right.
That's how I was thinking about it.
Right. And just to add one more thing, another thing that I've done, and again, speaking from more university college setting, I've also reached out to department chairs or different units and said, hey, when's your weekly staff meeting? Can I come at the beginning of the end to introduce myself? Brief one-pager who I am and contact information. And that has gone over well, too.
Sure.
So you're trying to get into meetings.
Yeah.
And you're basically advertising and marketing Joelle.
Yes. You need to know that I'm here. You need to understand my role because with the charge I have for enrollment and recruitment, that is not a one-woman show. I need every corner of the campus. And at the end of the day, enrollment equals budget and dollars and performance. And so I'm trying to garner as many stakeholders as I can.
And it sounds in a way, and I want to hear from you, Hilary, after this, is that you're saying, here's how I can be valuable to you.
Yes. The pitch.
So that I'm not here to bother you. I'm here to be a resource.
Yes.
Okay. And what do you think about that, Hilary? Do you have anything? Can you fill that out a bit for us?
Yeah, so I'm more apt to tell people to get out and touch as many people as early as possible.
When you say touch, you don't mean actually touch.
I don't mean actually touch.
Because there's been some problems with that.
Go ask them for lunch or to coffee, because there's a grace period where you can ask all the silly questions or what you think are silly questions early on, and I really encourage people to do that. And I do think that there is that script, or people are going to want to know who you are. What's your brand?
What are some of the silly questions? When you say silly questions, what would you like people to be asking, Rick?
I'd want to know how they interrelate to other groups. I'd want to know, let's say, if they were on the product team, what aspect of the product they were responsible for. I'd want to know what their priorities were. If I was going to, let's say, work on partnership activities, like what's on their roadmap and what are the priorities, and maybe try to understand why the priorities are as they are, so that I don't get off on the wrong foot by talking smack to a prospective partner and saying, sure, we can do that. And they haven't prioritized it, and then there's animosity. So I kind of want to understand the company culture and why things are prioritized a certain way so I don't stray. I don't want to be the person that agitates. I'd much rather set a healthy expectations externally.
Right.
And I'm sorry, Hilary, I cut you off, but did you want to say more about that? I apologize.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of why questions to ask when I say silly questions. They're like, why do you do it this way? How do you do it? A lot of times we assume something versus just asking, how does that work? Who's involved? Why do you do it that way? And so to me, those are kind of questions that we tend not to like to ask, but those are the questions that will help us figure out how to best perform in the new role.
And overall, what I'm hearing, the sense I'm saying is, before you get out of the gate at your new job, understand what's around the track.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
You must.
It must. Absolutely must. Otherwise, who knows if you're going in the right direction.
Right.
Or whose toes you'll step on.
And, in terms of decisions, on what matters can I move forward, and on what matters I better check in first before I get my head chopped off. Does the president like to be called Dr. Bartlett or Walter? What gets under his skin? Morning meetings better than afternoon. Believe it or not, those type of things matter. And I think Hilary points, those are kind of the silly or maybe minute questions that matter that you can ask in the first couple of days.
You're listening to You're Hired Radio. I'm your host, Lauren Epstein, here on 96.7 FM, Arlington, Virginia. Today we're talking about the first 90 days, and we're going over what you can do to make your whole career at a new job successful. So I want to thank my guests. And so the next thing I wanted to talk about was, what do you do if you're an HR professional or a recruiter to kind of help this along? Because right now, everything we've talked about is on the employee, right? If you're an organization, and even if you're an employee, how do you help people onboard? This can't just be on the employee, because most people are not going to necessarily be confident enough or comfortable enough or have the influence that you might have as a vice president to do those things.
Right, right.
What do we tell them? Hilary.
So the first thing is to have the checklist.
What's on the
all the various
checklist?
things that they probably need to do beyond the onboarding. The various, understand the strategy, providing the documents. The second is they can be really helpful HR professionals in helping schedule some of these meetings. So we talked a little bit earlier about how difficult it can be to step out, but if someone's already kind of pre-scheduled some of the key meetings ahead of time, that can be really helpful, because then they're already calendared, and really then you just need to prepare for those meetings.
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, HR is acting as the broker, the facilitator to say...
A matchmaker, maybe.
Matchmaker.
Yeah.
Maybe saying, this person could be a good mentor for you, and as part of the onboarding, reach out to Sally, and she'll assist you with any questions you have as you start, and she can make any introductions that might be helpful. And so you have a go-to person that may not necessarily be your supervisor.
Right.
I just recently started a consulting project with the U.S. Forest Service, and it's amazing. And what I really appreciated with the people that I'm working with, all of them reached out to me and were very available to share me what's going on, what's the culture, what's the workload. And it really helped, given that we're a distributed work team. Like, we're not really working together in an office. Some of us aren't even in the same time zones. So it was very helpful in getting going. What else can HR do specifically to help broker this first 90 days?
I think it's this whole notion of like checking in. Very oftentimes, depending on the size of the organization, you have that orientation where you get this huge packet with all this information. And you're like, what is this? Some of them are time sensitive, some of them are not. So I think what has been helpful at organizations where the HR team has been best equipped to kind of help new employees is checking in, like, Joelle, it's been 30 days. Are you clear on how kind of health benefits work? Did you know that your family can have access to the library services? Just kind of that checking in, coaching at different entry midpoints of the employment process, I think would be something that's helpful as well.
I would think that if I was starting a new job, I would set up either, and I'm going to ask you how often, but maybe weekly or biweekly meetings with my manager to say, how am I doing? The mayor of New York, the old mayor of New York, Ed Koch, would walk around the streets in the 70s and he'd say, how am I doing to everybody? He was the first getting the feedback mechanism in place. How often should I set up a meeting with my manager to say, how am I doing? And then have some kind of empirical results to show I am or I'm not.
Right. And Rick and Hilary, I don't know what you think. I think biweekly, if it works for our calendars. And one of the things that I do, and I have my staff do as well, is kind of this exercise called weekly accomplishments. Not everything you did every day of the week, but what were those kind of, solidified accomplishments? And I take that into my one-on-one with the manager. Hand that tour. We look at it together and just say, hey, this is what the last couple of weeks have looked like. Is this what you were expecting that the team would be working on? And that serves as a good discussion tool.
Now, would you stop at 90 days?
I actually keep that going. I would continue that.
So really 90 days is kind of like forming the good habits.
Yes.
That are for the next several thousand days.
Yes, and because those discussions will help with performance appraisals as well. All of this, these meetings and documentation. Final review, you've got it there.
And Hilary, I know you work with a lot of executives. What's the difference between an executive and someone who's not in this process?
So a difference between the executive and someone who's not is the executive is coming in thinking about how they're also going to lead the organization. So they're bringing themselves up to speed, but they're using the 90 days to figure out what their strategy and direction they're going to take the organization next. So typically there's some priorities, but they have to now put that together into a game plan. So if you think about the first 90 days as getting started, and then your second 90 days are really implementing your strategy and direction. Mm-hmm. And it may be the existing strategy, but many times leaders are being brought in to do something different.
It's great. I think leaders and managers need to understand, with a lot of people, you really should not expect performance on day one of their job, right? There's got to be a lot of time put into place to making sure that you're creating this thing, which is probably a push-pull, because I could see Rick smiling. He's like, well, no, I'm paying them to work. I'm not paying them to give everyone a hug.
It's different depending on the role.
Uh-huh.
If you're a developer and you've been on the job for a week, you would think you probably have committed some code by then, and you're delivering something. So it really depends on the role, and that sort of bi-weekly thing that you were talking about is actually also a good tool in a younger company like a startup to be shared amongst your peers. Mm-hmm. In a healthy startup, I believe you have transparency. Mm. So when you have your initial team in a startup and you're still growing, it's important that the leadership across functions gets together and shares what's happening, and so there's transparency, because sometimes the great business idea will come from the VP of engineering, right, or the HR director. Or a great sales idea will come from someone who's a coder. You just don't know. And so in an early stage company, talking about what you're working on can facilitate growth by diversity of ideas.
You just gave me a great idea with the project I'm working on. I think next week when my team gets together physically, we'll have our own little kind of like, how are we all doing? Like, how am I doing? What's working? What's not working? What do I need to improve upon? It's only been a couple of weeks, but how can I start that feedback process you're talking about to create that transparency, which I think, feeds itself as being a positive thing, right? If I can trust my colleagues, I'll be more effective.
Right.
I'll, stretch.
Yep, stretch goals. Yeah.
It creates a tone of trust. If I feel like I can share in that meeting and someone feels a sense of combined ownership for the company goal. Hey, if I was doing that, Lauren, I might try X or Y. What do you think of that? And you go, yeah, that's a great idea. You're giving them positive feedback. They're feeling engaged with you in a sense of ownership in your success. It's just positive to be transparent like that.
Joelle, Hilary, do you want to contribute to what we're talking about here in this regard as far as how does this affect my long-term prognosis, right? So we're talking, I think we're all kind of getting this as adults, right? It seems like it makes sense. But is there any data that backs this up?
There's data that says that people that don't spend time on their first 90 days, about 40% of the executives fail in the first 18 months.
Wow.
Wow, that's So, and that's a huge investment, right, when you hire an executive.
Huge, multi-millions of dollars if they're with big companies.
And often we see that in the papers, an executive only lasts 18 months. Maybe this is the reason why.
Point back to those first 90 days. Did they learn what they needed to learn, make the right connections, and are they figuring out how they're going to lead in this situation, not how they led in the last? At the same time, I think Rick brings up a good point. Leaders are also expected to start making some decisions early, but that doesn't mean you have to abandon your transition plan. They just need to run alongside each other.
So there's a shared, how I'm committing my 40 or 50 hours a week to some of it's got to be working on my personal strategy, maybe a smaller percentage, obviously, as we go along. But there's some deliverables every week, right? You're doing something. Right? So that you're showing that that's your job, whatever your job accountabilities are and responsibilities. One of the things I notice, there's a diagram called RACI, which means who's responsible, who's accountable, who needs to be consulted, and who needs to be informed. And in many organizations, an initiative will come out, and probably the reason you were hired was because something new is happening. But yet nobody in that space knows who is playing what position on this team. And then, it just kind of fails.
Right.
So maybe that's one of the things you can add to your toolkit of understanding where you are is to inform yourself on this thing called a RACI diagram so that you know where you fit into the machine and where everyone else fits.
Right.
Like on a playing field, right? On a baseball field, everyone knows what the shortstop does. And the second baseman knows what the shortstop's going to do when certain things happen and they can act appropriately. Same thing at work. I can know what other people are supposed to do, so I act appropriately. I think that's kind of a bit what we're talking about.
Right. I just had experiences sometime where an initiative will come out, say, IT, which is not my expertise. And I'm like, why am I on this committee? And then once everybody is convened, I'm like, oh, I was appointed to this for the leadership, to chair. Joelle can kind of come in here and corral everyone, get folks that usually don't talk across the tracks to talk to, deliver. So I don't really need to share any insight on IT and Blackboard or anything like that. But it's kind of keeping folks organized and keeping them moving is why I'm involved. So I think you're right with that.
Yeah, I want to find out from everyone. Actually, Hilary, what inspired you to write this book, and why are you passionate about this particular subject?
So I spend a fair amount of time with executives in implementing pretty large-scale change, and what I found was most of the change started with an executive moving into a new role, and somewhere 90 to 120 days later, they are implementing some pretty significant changes in an organization, and some of those leaders were highly prepared for that, and others did not have the backing or the understanding about the business. And so I ended up starting to work with leaders as they came into organization to get prepared in that first 90 days to then lead the next 6 to 18 months so that they and their core organizations could be successful. So I have a huge passion of helping leaders really get their arms around the business very quickly so that they can then set the direction to get the revenues, the earnings, the growth that they're looking for in that company.
Well, that's interesting. And when did you write your book?
Last year.
Cool.
But I've been working with this on this topic for over 15 years.
And Joelle, what had you make this the topic you wanted to talk about? Why are you so passionate about it?
Well, as I transition into more managerial positions and my staff begin to grow, I begin to notice the newer professionals, like 1 to 3 years in the profession, or mid-level professionals, get very frustrated, confused, and kind of off the correct path in the first 90 days. And as a manager from the balcony view, not relying on HR, I was like, what could I do better as leadership in terms of providing information, supporting, mentoring, and coaching so that they kind of start off better? So that's really where my increased interest and passion has come into play with this topic.
And Rick, I know you've worked with really high-performing professionals. Do you notice a difference between when this occurs and when it doesn't occur? At least in an informal way, because sometimes this occurs in an informal way, like we talked about earlier, not necessarily documented. But do you notice a difference?
For sure. Either someone is sinking or swimming. In a startup environment, there's really no hiding it. You're either engaged correctly, or there's really not a lot of cushion like you have in a bigger company. And my individual interest in this subject is starting on a new endeavor, and so I'm dealing with my own first 90 days and broadening the team. So I also want to have the right people thinking around how they're going to be productive in the first 90 days. Right. And what are they going to bring to the table? What's my expectation for them within the first 90 days? There are things that have to be done. How do I see them filling a hole?
And what have you done in your first 90 days? What's your 90-day plan? Or what have you accomplished?
So far, it's been very much around fundraising. In a startup, it needs startup capital. So I've been spending a lot of time on fundraising. So
that that's the thing that you're there for.
That's one of the things.
And everyone knows one of the things that you're there for. And you're in action.
Correct.
And are you reporting back on that on how often? Or are you?
Yes. Whenever I have an update or I've had a meeting, and then certain colleagues are engaged in those discussions, I bring people along and then post-meeting share with other key team members so they, again, feel that sense of transparency. I'm a big believer in sharing more than keeping things to myself. I want people to be enthused by outside parties' interests in what we're doing. As an example, let's say someone's working on technology. They're working a lot of hard hours and they're adding a lot of value. They may not be in on those investor meetings. And when an investor says something positive like, wow, what you're doing here is really special, that person who's sacrificing all those hours working really hard, it's important for them to hear that. Yeah. It's very inspiring. And so definitely share, and there's a great deal of visibility into that. Mm-hmm.
So you're listening to You're Hired. I'm your host, Lauren Epstein. We're here at 96.7 FM, Arlington, Virginia. Today we're talking about what to do in the first 90 days, and my guests are doing an amazing job of illustrating what you can do to make your career better. So, a lot of the things here are what I do individually and maybe what the company might support me to do, but there is some new technology out there that's helping. And one of the things I wanted to speak to, having a familiarity with these tools called applicant tracking systems. And applicant tracking systems are large pieces of software companies buy to manage the flow of candidates. And there's a new structure where you can plug in different pieces. And one of the pieces is onboarding. So if you Google onboarding technology, there are a ton of pieces of software that will guide you through your onboarding process. So doing a lot of things, automating a lot of these things that we're all talking about. Mm-hmm. So it's not just kind of like left up to chance. What questions will I ask? What questions won't I ask? Who will I have a meeting with? So I would encourage people who have companies to look at some of the technology to make this easier, to help your employees, because clearly we all think it's a positive thing.
Right.
There's no downside to onboarding. It's all upside, right?
Agreed.
I agree. Yeah. Totally agree. Mm-hmm.
So are there any other pieces of technology or any other advice you would give to someone who is like, okay, now what do I do? I get it. You convinced me.
Right.
Or some of the resources out there. I know some of you have written books.
So there are a lot of tools online. You just go and Google the first 90 days, and you're going to see a variety of books. I'm one of many who've written books, and there are some really good templates to get yourself started. And speaking of getting started, I always suggest to get started before day one to map out your plan, because what we've heard Joelle and Rick talk about is you get into that role, and all of a sudden you need to start delivering. Mm-hmm. So if you don't have the plan already scoped out, you find it hard to find the time to create that plan.
And it sounds like I can map it out knowing that I may have to change it.
That's right.
Like, that's okay. It's not a map written in stone. It's a map written on a computer.
Right.
It just gives you a point to pivot.
Awesome.
And if I could add, it's not really an online tool, but like the day before, I think there's value in reading the employee manual. Rick and Hilary, I don't know what you think about that, but oftentimes it's available online. It's a document that guides the organization, guides work, but we don't look at it until trouble arises. So becoming familiar with some of those documents that are the cornerstone of the organization, I think is critical and pays off in the long run as well.
That's awesome. Well, this has been a great show. Just want to thank everyone. I want to thank my guest, Hilary Potts, who is a leader in strategy. Hilary, how do people get a hold of you if they want to?
The easiest way is to go on my website at www.hilarypotts.com, and I spell Hilary with one L, HILARYPOTTS.com.
Wonderful. And Rick, if people wanted to get a hold of you, how would they do that?
I'm on every social platform, or most, but probably Rick without a K.
Are you on like the Chinese Facebook?
No, I'm not.
Because that's all I do.
But Ric Fleisher on LinkedIn, just RICFLEISHER on LinkedIn. You can send me an email, or rfleisher, RFLEISHER on Twitter. And always happy to answer questions from entrepreneurs and others.
And Joelle, how would people reach out to you if they wanted to?
The same here. I'm with Rick. I'm very active on LinkedIn. So Joelle Davis Carter, LinkedIn. I think it ends Dr. Joelle Carter. And I'm also on Twitter at Dr. Carter Cares. So
awesome.
If you tweet me, that would be awesome.
Well, I'm Lauren Epstein on Twitter at Lauren Epstein. And you're listening to You're Hired. Come back next week for the next edition. Thank you so much for being a listener, and please reach out to us. Let us know what you think. You can call me at 240-876-0276 or email us at lauren@electriccow.com. Looking forward to hearing from you and answering your questions. This has been You're Hired.